Hello, everyone. I'm so excited that you could join us for today's workshop on understanding hiring in higher ed. My name is Allison Howard. I'm an associate director on the graduate student and postdoctoral fellow team at Penn Career Services. And this program is part of our Career Insight series, where every month, more or less, we highlight a different career field that may be of interest to Penn graduate students and postdocs and do deep dives into how to strategically prepare for roles in that field. So this week's theme is careers in higher ed administration. So in addition to this session, we're going to have two more events this week, a discussion panel tomorrow at noon with 3 graduate alumni who are now working in higher ed, and then a workshop on Wednesday on leveraging your doctoral experiences for student services roles. So I will drop a link to our website in the chat, so you can read more about those programs and register if you're interested. But we're very privileged to have with us today Alex Kralicek, who is a talent acquisition manager in the Division of Human Resources here at Penn. She works with basically all departments and centers that fall under the umbrella of the Provost's office, I believe. So it's a very large and diverse portfolio. And the goal of our conversation today is really just to demystify the hiring process a little bit, to help you understand what goes on behind the scenes. I know that for a lot of students, hiring is a bit of a black box, so they have no idea what happens after they submit an application. So we're going to try to shed some light on that process so that if and when you do decide to apply for roles in higher ed, you can present yourself as the strongest possible candidate. So Alex, thank you so much for being here. I'm really looking forward to hearing your insights. Just to kick things off, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your background and what your role here at Penn entails.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. I'm happy to be here too. So for everyone that may know me or not, I'm also a student here at Penn in the Graduate School of Education as well. And I lead recruiting for all of the provost centers, as Allison mentioned. So that's everything from I'll hire a head field hockey coach or executive director of Prairie World House or administrative coordinators for college houses and academic services. It's a broad portfolio. I manage a team of 2 other recruiters. And my background prior to joining Penn, I have led recruiting for tech startups. I worked at Amazon for 8 years. And prior to that, worked in healthcare and retail and staffing. I've been in recruiting almost my whole career, and really enjoy it. And I'm happy to share some insights today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So I know I would personally find it really helpful if you could just kind of walk us through the full life cycle of the hiring process here at Penn. So who writes the job ad? Where does it get posted? How long does it stay up? What happens to applications after they're submitted? Who's looking at them? Maybe we can just kind of start with the broad blows and then we'll dive into specific pieces of that process.
Yeah, and I'll say like my one caveat is there are standard steps in the process, but depending upon the school or the organization, they might do things differently. So you might have like for writing a job description, there might be something standard that is just used for every type of that role in an individual school or department. Others might be edited to provide more detail or specificity. In the provost areas, we work closely with our hiring managers to help them craft those job descriptions so that they accurately represent what the job is and what the qualifications are in the person that we're looking for. So that job goes through an approval process and then gets posted in Workday, so on Penn Careers, but also goes out to a variety of other sites kind of like automatically. Some departments might choose to post things like the library might choose to post with the American Libraries Association or other niche sites to kind of attract the individuals that have those particular skills. And the general basic steps are people see our jobs, people apply to the jobs. There is some form of application review. And at that application review, what we're really looking for is how does that candidate's profile like match to the job and what we're looking for. So there are a couple things that are sort of legal compliance requirements, like minimum requirements. So if you all see anything on a job that says required and a candidate does not meet that requirement, we can't consider them. So those are folks that will get kind of rejected for not meeting qualifications. Everything else, you'll likely see things as listed as preferred or strongly preferred or some other form of that. And those are what we use to sort of anchor onto how we're going to craft this candidate pool. So obviously, folks that have more of the preferred qualifications are more likely to advance in the process. Um, so we try and back to the job description to try and make that really clear in the job description so it can be helpful to applicants to know like, oh, I have that or I don't have that. Um, the next step after that is some form of screening. So that can be a phone call, it can be a Zoom conversation. Penn does also have an online tool called Spark Hire, which is like a one-way video interviewing. So you record yourself answering a series of questions, and then the hiring team or manager will review that. But that's sort of like one screening step, and then from there they'll decide which candidates that they want to move forward in the process. And that can be another Zoom interview, it can be direct to an on-campus interview. That really varies depending upon the role. And then references, offer, background check, all of those things. So that's sort of the process at a high level.
Perfect. Yeah, so kind of following up on what you were saying about requirements versus preferred qualifications, a question I get asked a lot in advising appointments is, do candidates need to meet every single requirement to apply? So, you said there's certain things that they do have to meet, but in terms of the preferred qualifications, is it still worth applying if you don't have all of those preferences? Is there a kind of an ideal number of them that students should meet in order to be competitive?
Yeah, so this is a tricky question because I always encourage everybody to apply, and like you can use a cover letter or update your resume like for each job to help the person reviewing that resume like more easily see how you could be set up for success in that role. But it really depends on like what you can't see, which is like why I hate answering this question, because some days you could be the strongest candidate in that pool, and other days you're just not, because and it depends on who you're sort of surrounded by, and you don't have visibility to that. So like I always encourage you to apply, and like because you never know. um and but it is important to like, if somebody is listing a bunch of preferred qualifications, they are likely going to select candidates that have those qualifications. Because if you put yourself in the hiring manager's shoes, like while everybody would love to be like, I'm going to help grow and develop this person's career, sometimes they're in a position where they need someone who's going to hit the ground running, and they might not have the bandwidth or ability to help train someone to do a new skill that they don't have. So that's why they'll always sort of anchor towards the other qualifications. But again, some days like you might be the best person in there because of kind of who you're surrounded with. But again, it's really important to like help make those connections for hiring managers with your resume or a cover letter, to help them see what they might not be able to see, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's the advice we always give at Career Services as well. So if, any students on the call, if you need help kind of making those connections to your resume and cover letter, that's what we can do through our advising appointments. So another thing I get asked about a lot is the sort of timing of submissions, right? So someone will see a job ad, it's been up for 3 weeks already, and they'll ask me, is it too late to apply? Should I try to apply as soon as something's posted? So, do you typically begin reviewing applications immediately, or is there sort of a waiting period? Is there any advantage to submitting earlier in the process?
I will say for roles that are I don't like to use the word entry level, but I would say like, let's say low minimum requirements where we expect to see a lot of applications. We'll start reviewing those earlier than later, and usually within the first week or two, because we don't want, sometimes we'll get hundreds of people that apply, and the people that apply after the first week, like we're likely never going to be able to get to them. So we want to close the posting. So we'll review it early. um, so I would say that those types of roles, like expect to see, more competition, because there's just more availability of talent that have meet those requirements. But we typically will do an initial pass after, like for a role, I'll just say like a role that falls into like a more general bucket. We'll do an initial pass about after about 2 weeks, and then kind of see how the candidate pool is shaping up and if we need to continue to look at applicants. And it's really role specific. I will tell you right now that I had a job for a application developer for the library that was posted for 7 days and got 400 applicants. So we shut that down like right away because we didn't want to collect more applicants, and 7 days is our minimum requirement for the university postings. So it really depends. If a job is still posted, they are likely accepting applications, though it depends, again, on the school or center or department, and if they're proactively taking postings down. But if it's posted, they're still, I would always say they're still accepting applications and go ahead and apply. But the earlier, the better, especially for roles that have kind of those, lower entry requirements, because there'll be a lot of competition.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really helpful. Um, so in terms of the kind of initial evaluation of applications, you said there's, the screening, you're checking for certain questions and requirements. So is that HR that's doing the initial review of resumes? Is it the office that's doing the hiring? And is there any AI screening of resumes?
So that also depends. For the provost, since we have the function centralized under my team, it is HR that's doing all of the screening for those roles. That might vary across the university. I think most of the time it's an HR person, but sometimes it might be the hiring manager directly that's doing that. Um, and then I think there was a second question there, but I'll answer the AI question. We don't have AI screening at Penn. There are tools that will help kind of evaluate the strength of an applicant, but they're really more for sorting. Like every resume is reviewed by a human at Penn, so there's no like automatic rejection of folks because they didn't have certain keywords on their resume. And I tend to look at every resume anyway because I don't trust the AI to tell me if somebody's a good candidate or not, because sometimes it's wrong. So
No, that's reassuring to hear because I mean that's what we've heard as well. Is it's certainly not universal, this AI screening.
yeah,
At most, what I've heard is maybe 50% of organizations are using it. So, but obviously it's
yeah,
on everyone's mind. We get a lot of questions about it. So at least
yeah,
at Penn, it's good to know that that's not how resumes are being evaluated.
yeah.
Um, so based on your evaluations, what would you say are some of the most common kind of mistakes or red flags that you've seen in applications? I mean, you've talked about the importance of kind of demonstrating fit for the role, but are there other, issues that tend to come up time and time again?
Um, oh yeah, like the cover letters that have the wrong job title on them. So obviously somebody used like reused a cover letter for another job, um, or what probably doesn't apply to this group, but we get a lot of applications that say they're really interested in working for Penn State. Um, and we are not Penn State, obviously. So things like that, like, and also like really generic cover letters, that again, that's not helpful for us to make those connections. So like how you could be successful in that job. Um, and really just, I would say common, typos or mistakes. All of our postings will ask for a cover letter if it's required, and a lot of people miss that. And I'll still look at those resumes, but there are cases where where hiring manager will be like, well, if they didn't submit a cover letter, I don't want to see them because it was in the posting. Can't they pay attention to detail? Um, and then also, not every organization does this, but Penn does post salary. Um, so people that are submitting salary expectations that are significantly over the range, like that you're likely not going to get considered for that role because we're gonna think, oh, we can't afford your expectations. But really it's the missing cover letters, it's the mistakes, and other things that are most common.
Out of curiosity, are you required to input a salary expectation when you apply for a job at Penn?
There is a field that asks for it. You can say like negotiable or I don't know, I want to talk about that. Um, but it's in our end, it's really helpful so that we don't get someone down and this has happened. We get people all the way through the process and then you offer them the job and they're like, I can't take that job. I wanted $20,000 more than that. And we're like, well, this is what we had posted. So it is a required application question, but you don't have to put salary in there. And I do like I'll be really, kind of transparent. And then I know sometimes that people are worried about putting salary because they're like, oh, you're just going to give me what I asked for. And we don't actually do compensation that way at Penn. So the job could have a budget of 80,000 and you ask for 60, but if we think your background, experience, education like warrants 80,000, that's the offer you'll get. We won't kind of lowball you just because you listed something below the maximum budget.
That's great to hear because yeah, that is a concern that a lot of students have expressed to me. But a kind of related question. So as you said, Penn does list pay ranges in the job ad. So what are the factors that determine where within that range, a particular offer is made, and kind of how negotiable are salaries?
Yeah, so we will look at the job itself and how that candidate compares to the job. So like if the job requires 5 years of experience, the candidate has 10, obviously they're going to be more experienced and warrant something higher in the range. If they have advanced degrees, and also internal equity too. So we don't want to bring someone in paying them significantly higher than someone that has more experience than them. So we look at that by job profile. So job profile is one of sort of the building blocks of a job. Um, so like you might have a job family that is student services, and then a job profile is like director D in student services. So we'll look at all of those job profiles across the university and say like, how does this candidate compare to individuals doing the job already? But yeah, the largest factors are kind of the job and internal equity, like those comparisons.
Perfect. So you already shared kind of some of the things to avoid with applications. To flip that question on its head, what are some best practices that might help a candidate get noticed, especially in those cases where you are receiving, maybe hundreds of applications? What are some of the things that stand out to you when you're reviewing resumes and cover letters?
It's again like anything you can do to make my job or the manager's job easier. Like I'll go back to like making it really clear like how you match up to the qualifications and responsibilities of the job. And I'll say like sometimes people will say, oh well, like to give an example, like my job title says grants coordinator, and this is a grants coordinator, so you must be able to infer that I can do that. But that's not always the case because the responsibilities for our grants coordinator might be different than what you've done before. So kind of drawing those connections in your cover letter, quantifying things. So if I know that this person is going to be supporting like a constituency population of several hundred, and I can see on your resume or your cover letter that you've had experience with similar scale, that can really help me make that connection. Be like, oh, this person has done this at this level before. So quantifying where you can is also really helpful for me to kind of see the scope and complexity of what you've done.
Absolutely. And again, this is what we always recommend at career services as well. So
Okay.
it's good to see that we're aligned there. Um, So I get asked a lot about referrals as well. So do I need a referral to get hired? Is it even worth applying if I don't know someone who already works there? So does Penn have a referral system? And if so, how important are those referrals?
I don't look at referrals from a recruiting perspective. It's like a source category. So like you can come to us via LinkedIn, you can come to us via American Libraries Association or through a referral. Um, we'll look at who the referrer is to understand more about them if it's something we need to pay attention to, but they're not weighted any heavier than others. And it is you can, as the person's applying, they can list somebody that they know at Penn, like as their like, how did you hear about this job? Um, but it doesn't like move you to the top of the stack, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful to hear. Sort of a related question, thinking about kind of internal versus external candidates, is there any advantage to already being within the Penn ecosystem? Do internal candidates get any sort of preference, or are they kind of weighed equally?
I think it depends, like where um I'll use like a financial role, like where knowledge of Ben financials, which is the system only Penn uses, like is helpful. Like that might get an internal candidate like more exposure than an external candidate. But we don't tend to weigh that. Obviously, like if somebody's already internal to Penn, like there's some expectation that they know Penn, they know the systems, like how Penn functions. But more often than not, like we also want external perspectives too. Like we can't perpetuate like like this insular Penn community all the time. So we don't give internal candidates like more weight than others again, unless there's like a really specific like, and Ben Financials is the only time I've seen it where somebody was like, I really would prefer someone because it's really hard to learn that system. And if they're already internal, that would be really helpful. But no, there's not any sort of I mean, there's an advantage, I would say, because you kind of know Penn, but there's not any sort of additional weighting that goes in there.
Thank you. Um, so most of our students graduate in May, sometimes August or December, but usually May. So with that in mind, are there any seasonal patterns to administrative hiring at universities? You know, does it follow the academic calendar at all, or is hiring sort of happening year round?
It's happening year round. So for my team supports staff positions. So any other type of role, I'm not sure, but the only seasonal or cyclical hiring I've seen is in athletics, and that's mainly around coaches. So like after the fall sports are done, like a lot of those assistant coaches will leave and we'll fill them. The same thing after spring, but that's the only thing. It does slow down a bit in the summer just because people don't have time to interview. But it's not like a significant slowdown. We're pretty busy all year round.
And what would you say is the typical time frame from submitting an application to receiving an offer? So let's say a job gets posted today, I apply today. What sort of time frame could I expect?
That's a great question. And again, it depends. All my answers are going to be like it depends. But so our average time to fill on our team is 90 days. So that's from the first posting date to when we got an offer accept. But some roles are much longer than that. Some roles are much shorter. I think it really depends on how motivated the hiring manager is. Some things that if it's an extensive interview process, like for a senior level role, like that might take 6 months because we've got a lot of people involved in that decision. Whereas, like if I'm hiring a house coordinator, that might take 30 days because it's a small decision making body. It's a high volume of qualified applicants, so we can kind of get through those more quickly. So I would say like anywhere from 90 days to 6 months would be an average, depending upon the role.
No, that's perfect because that's what I've been telling people as well. 3 to 6 months is what you should be budgeting,
Yeah.
for your job search, and that's assuming that you're getting interviews right away. And obviously,
Yeah.
you have to kind of budget for applying for multiple roles.
Mhm.
Um, so we had a question from one of our students that was submitted in advance that I wanted to make sure we got to. Does having a similar background as someone already in the office hurt your chances of being selected? What if I'm not unique enough?
I think that's a great question because I feel that like the behind that question kind of, like how do I stand out? Like what if everybody's not like me and how do I kind of get visibility. And I don't think it hurts or helps. Like one of the things that actually some trainings that I do here in the Provost area is like trying to help people understand that like having everybody the same, whether it's the same background, education, experience, like doesn't help like the work because you're always going to have you need different perspectives. So I would say like not having a dissimilar background like, isn't a disadvantage. It can help um, as add perspective to the team. And many hiring managers that I work with are looking for that. They're not looking for like more of the same. Like they want unique perspective. And I don't know how to answer like how being unique enough because I think that's really subjective and I don't not everybody like has like jumped out of a burning building or so like something like really that would like make you like kind of very different. I think everybody is unique and like you just have to play to your strengths and like what's um kind of what you bring to the role, and being able to articulate that to the hiring manager through specific examples of your work is really helpful.
Yeah, no, I think that's great advice of just focusing on specificity, because I think a lot of students, when they're concerned about this, it's more, I have a master's in behavior decision science, and so do hundreds of other people, and how am I going to stand out? But that's just the degree title. That doesn't fully
Yeah,
encompass all of your experiences and skills. And so finding other ways to articulate the kind of unique intersection of kind of skills and interests that you're bringing.
yeah.
There was a question in the chat, sort of related to the timing question I asked. Is there a way to know for job posting when is the anticipated start date? So especially thinking about students
Mm.
who, may not be graduating until May or may have summer classes. If a job posting again goes up today, you said it's usually, 90 days to offer. But then after that, is the actual start date negotiable, or is there any way to kind of know that ahead of time?
Um, in a rare occurrence, they might put, if there's a specific need to have someone start by a certain time, they would put that in the job posting itself. We've definitely negotiated start dates with candidates, like based on finishing school or relocation or whatever it is. I would encourage people to like share that up front in like discussions. So that the hiring manager is aware that there might be a delay if it were. But most of the time, like, we're so happy to get a really strong candidate that we can be flexible to make sure that person can join, for sure.
Wonderful, thank you. We had another question for PhD students in the humanities. How do we know if we are overqualified or underqualified? I get asked this a lot. In the case of language programs, we have no IT skills training, but it's still a PhD. So I will say we're going to have a whole program just on that on Wednesday, on focusing on how doctoral students can leverage those experiences when applying for student services roles. But Alex, I would love to hear your perspective as well, as someone who works with both entry-level candidates and more advanced candidates with PhDs. How do you kind of market those skills for roles in higher ed?
Yeah. Overqualified is my least favorite word in recruiting because nobody's ever overqualified. But I know you hear that. I know you all are like, well, you have a PhD, why would you want this job? But I would say, again, it's about making connections. So like if you say like I don't have IT skills, but like, or training, like, but you do, like, you've probably just had to do it yourself, right? Like you've had to teach yourself a tool, or you to learn like how to prepare research analysis or collect data. And those are things that, like, those are part of making those connections. So that people can see like what you've done, and less about like these, like, what your degree is in or whatever, like the tangible things are really helpful. So like thinking through the advice I give to people when I'm giving like coaching on how to interview is like actually like write about yourself like you're making a Wikipedia page, and be like, these are, and like, there's a summary. So like, what's my summary? What are the things I'm proud of? What have I done? And then like, but then list the details, and you'll be surprised when you find like, you're like, oh, for, this particular project, I had to manage 20 different stakeholders, and I use 3 different tools or technologies to collect 10,000 data points. And that, and once you start doing that for yourself, it can become easier to present that both in written form in your resume and a cover letter, but also when you get an interview to be able to articulate like what you've done, even though like on paper it might not seem relevant, like it probably is, like if you kind of dig deeper and like and think about what those work or projects or experience that you've had.
100%. And I will say, as a humanities PhD myself, who now works at Career Services, it is possible. I'd be happy to talk to anyone more about that, and how I was able to leverage my PhD experiences to make that transition. Yeah, so there was a question in the chat that actually was going to be my next question anyway. So I did want to briefly touch on the kind of current state of the job market in higher ed. As I'm sure many people have heard, some universities including Penn, have issued hiring freezes in response to recent executive orders and loss of funding. And there's understandably some anxiety around that. Now, I know for a fact that not every university has issued a hiring freeze. You know, it's not as pervasive as what happened during COVID. So there's definitely still jobs out there in higher ed. But Alex, would you be able to shed any light on just sort of how hiring freezes work? You know, is it all jobs? Is it only some jobs? How long do you anticipate these freezes might last? And just sort of any advice you have on how to approach a job search in higher ed in the current climate.
Yeah, I would, so yeah, hiring freezes are very specific to the organization that's doing that. And then even like some parts like of Penn, like they might approach a hiring freeze different than others. And like, really how I describe hiring freezes is like, in my experience, are less of like a freeze and more of like a pause. Like something has happened, like whether it's COVID or it's like impact to funding, it's executive orders, and we need to pause and like figure out if we need to make a different decision. And that can be to the extreme of like take it all down, like shut everything down. You have to re-request everything from the beginning and create extra justification, to sort of what this like hybrid of like, well, some roles are like good to go and others are not. So like one example in my area is like, so we support health and wellness, and those are people providing care to patient populations that are students. So those roles were not impacted by the freeze because they are providing critical service. Whereas like an administrative role might get more scrutiny. Like, do we need to hire this role? Could we do without the role? So let's pause and gather that information before we move forward with that. So it's really different depending on kind of the environment. And I know that some universities have been on the more extreme, like shut it down, and some are more like Penn, where we're just examining role by role. Um, and I guess I've tried. I don't know if I have any great advice, because it is uh, daunting to think about like entering the workforce when all this is happening. If you want a career in higher ed, but I would say, be patient. Like, and you might find yourself like having to apply to a lot more jobs than you would have normally applied to, like from a volume perspective, just to kind of get in there, because it's like it's not just impacting like one institution. It's like it's a ripple effect that like has a bunch of impacts. There's more candidates on the market, there's less jobs, things like that. And then and expand what you're interested in. So like if you really were like, I really want to work in a job that supports like fellowships or Fulbright scholars, like that might not happen. So like be open to what you'd consider, and be persistent and set up. Sometimes it can be really helpful to set up like job alerts, like on university sites, or um I can't remember the name of the, like Google lets you do this thing where you can like have Google alerts. I think that's what it's called, Google alerts on certain things, just to keep kind of up to date, um, and try and stay positive, I would say, because it can't last forever.
Yeah, that's an uplifting note to end on. It can't last forever. It didn't last forever last time with COVID
Exactly.
either. And I will say I was job searching in the middle of COVID, and you know, it all worked out in the end. So people do find ways into higher ed, even if it's maybe less linear than anticipated, or you know,
Yeah.
twists and turns along the way.